Welcome to the Exodus Cry podcast, where we have honest conversations around exploitation, trafficking, sexual culture, and justice.
Well, Don, it's great to sit down with you in person this time. The last time we did a podcast together, I think, was over the phone a few years ago. And you are between right now Cambodia and the States, and but we don't get to see each other very often. So this feels like a special moment.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here.
It's great to have you. It's great to have you. I'll just give a little bit of backdrop for kind of how we got connected for people that are maybe being introduced to you for the first time. So you moved to Cambodia to fight trafficking. What was the year again? I know it's been a minute now.
2005.
Okay, in 2005. And so you have invested your life into the work of eradicating predominantly child sex trafficking in Cambodia. Mm-hmm. And in 2008, a few years after you had moved there, we started to do a documentary on global sex trafficking. And there was a young man who worked for you at the time named Clayton Butler.
Yep.
And Clayton had come out to visit us on numerous occasions from Cambodia and would tell us stories of the situation going on there. So we felt like that was one of the places that we wanted to go document where trafficking was happening. And Clayton is an amazing human being, just such a quality person through and through. And we really enjoyed connecting with him at that time. And we really invested ourselves into praying for you guys and everything that was going on there. And he would talk of this Don Brewster and Bridget Brewster. And I remember in his descriptions of you, he would describe you as this person who was so devoted to the work of trafficking in a very ferocious sense, but who carried the burden of trafficking with such tenderness. And I specifically remember him talking to me about how he would say things like, you can't have a conversation with Don without him, tearing up over the stories of, these girls. And so immediately from before I ever even met you, I started to develop this esteem for you. And I thought, man, that's how I feel. I felt so tender over the lives of those that were being affected by trafficking. I was in a season, I would say, of just weeping over this issue. And I just thought, man, I have to meet this person. I can't wait to meet this person. And so we traveled to Cambodia, and I think our whole team was pretty jet lagged. It took us about 48 hours to finally make our way into actually being there. And we have coordinated a meeting to interview you for this documentary that we were doing. Mm-hmm. And we make our way out into this very out of the way village on the outskirts of Phnom Penh called SWAT. I don't really know what to expect, but I feel like, we're making a documentary, and here we're coming in to conduct our interview. And I remember when we had arrived, somebody had to kind of go find you, and you come walking out in sandals and sweat shorts on, and I think it was like a tank top or something. And we're like, introduced ourselves. Hey, we're here to film or whatever. And you're like, okay, great. You can have a seat right over here. And it was like on a weight bench in a gym you guys had started in Swipe. And I thought, oh, here, like this right now. Yeah, I got an hour. Like, okay. So being jet lagged, just kind of out of our element, we did the interview, but I had a sense this was a powerful interview in the moment, but after the fact, I couldn't even remember the interview. We were just in another country. We're jet lagged. I'm bug eaten everywhere. I don't know, the food's not working in my system. Like the whole thing was like very, very difficult for us Westerners. And then, years went by and where we were filming around the world. So when we got into our edit suite and began to go through the footage, we had captured literally hundreds of hours of footage and dozens of interviews. And we were editing in this office that was so extremely hot for different reasons. I mean, it was the thermometer would read around 130 degrees. So we're just drenched in sweat where the computer's not working right. It keeps crashing. We're in there for 18 hours a day, making probably an hour's worth of progress. It was a horrible situation. And I remember just sitting on our editing couch one day, drenched in sweat and my eyes crossed. I'm just, going through all this footage. Half of it's in foreign language. So I don't even understand what's being said. And there's this feeling of I've just wasted the last 4 years of my life. Like it was nice. It was like great to learn about trafficking, but I did not make a movie. And I remember when we stumbled on your interview and it was like, oh yeah, this is this gentleman that we had interviewed in Cambodia and this should be good. And so we start going through it. And I mean, we couldn't get through 2 minutes without just suddenly breaking down in tears. And it was like that through the whole interview. And there was this awareness as we were watching it, this is the film right here. And everything else we can build around this, but this is the film. There was so much life on the words that you spoke, and it was clearly something that you were living, and the weight and the authority of that came through with such power and tenderness. And last thing I'll say, and then I'll have you jump in here, but there's this passage in the book of Psalms that has always stood out to me, and it's a passage describing the Jewish Messiah. And it says that he loves righteousness, he loves justice, and hates evil. Therefore, God has anointed him with the oil of gladness more than anyone else. And I think for me, that is such a powerful description of a person's character. And that passage reminds me of you because you are somebody who carries this issue with such tenderness. It's such a dark, heavy, weighty, perverse, injustice. And you carry it on one hand with such tenderness for those who've been affected by this, but an equal amount of ferocity when it comes to bringing accountability to perpetrators. And so I've seen that at work in your life and just getting to know you. And it has been such a huge honor for us at Exodus Cry to have been able to tell part of your story. And so, yeah, I'm just very glad that we're here able to have a conversation together right now.
Well, so am I, and really humbled by the impact Nefarious had for us, the positive impact it had for us. It brought us volunteers, people who volunteered for up to 7 years.
Wow.
That's a committed volunteer,
Wow.
7 years.
Wow.
Literally millions of dollars given, which God used to transform hundreds of lives. It's like, it's crazy to think that someone like me could be used by God in that way, because there's nothing special about me, but God always brought great people to help us. Right? You mentioned Clayton. He's one of those great people God brought. But I think the most amazing thing that's going on right now that's really it's on my heart is, we have a SWAT team. I'm pretty sure we're the only ministry in the world with a SWAT. Maybe not, but I'm pretty sure we are.
Yeah.
And approved by the Cambodian government. And we were beginning to struggle in getting intel, right? The places where they sell the youngest children they don't want to give information. And if a man goes in and does the investigation, but he doesn't have sex with a kid, that's a red light. And so you don't get any information. And we had this one girl who's her story is crazy, but she had an up and down reintegration after she left us, and finally came. Her struggle was she wanted to help others, but she didn't know how she could do that. And we ended up, after 5 years maybe, her being an investigator on our SWAT team.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Wow.
She came from that world, right? She's tiny. She's really cute. She speaks 3 languages, Vietnamese, Khmer, and English. And so she started to go in and she would pretend she's looking for a job. And she would get all the information, right? I mean, the intel that she would bring back every single time led to a successful raid and rescue of kids. Every single time.
Wow.
And we're seeing this. And we thought, well, was there another girl? And there was another girl that was working in our employment center that had a heart for it. She went through the training. And now we've got these 2 great investigators, and they're doing so well that we just hired our 3rd female investigator who came out of that life, was healed through the love of Christ coming through our staff. And it's amazing. And the other thing that's really great about them is not only does she get the raid, right, these 3 girls, but they know where all the evidence is hidden in these brothels because they came from them. And so they go in, it's almost comical, them showing the police where to go to get the evidence, right? Because they know. And so to me, that journey from rescued to rescuer, really, really courageous. And, that's to right now, that story just it's so, these
powerful.
kids are so inspiring, right? How would they do it? And, I'm not going to share their backstory, but their backstory is the worst you can imagine, right? What they've been through. And yet now they have a courage to walk back in the place they were rescued from, gather intel so other girls can be set free.
So after we filmed with you, we continued to travel around the world documenting the crisis of global sex trafficking. And we got to meet people, organizations, ministries, government officials, survivors, traffickers. We got a very big global picture of what's going on. And people would often ask me, who would you, if there's an organization, who would you support? And for the longest time, I always told people the organization, that is the gold standard of this movement is AIM, Don Brewster, the work that they're doing in Cambodia. So that came from a very authentic place for me and for us. And we've always felt very compelled to promote you and to promote your work to the extent that we're actually writing a whole narrative feature film about your story, which I think is going to be incredible for the rest of the world to learn of it, to learn about your story and to connect with the story of the girls that you're helping. And it's just such an incredible, powerful story. So So I'm such a huge believer in you and everything you guys are doing in your work that, we're committing years of our life to help tell that story. After we interviewed with you, we eventually made our way back to the States. We wanted to put together an awareness center because I thought, here I have been out to Cambodia. I've been out to these places, but I can't expect that everybody's going to be able to have that experience. And I want to create an opportunity for people to have a similar experience without having, to go do all that travel themselves. Of course, that's always ideal, but not everybody can do that. So we had this idea of putting together an awareness center that would sort of tell the story of modern day trafficking. And I had reached out to you, are there any artifacts that you have that can help us tell the story of what's going on? And I remember a couple weeks, a short time went by, and you had gotten back to me and said, I do have something. I'm not sure if you can use it. And you went on to describe a raid that you guys conducted, and you had to recover the pajamas of a 7-year-old girl that were still stained with the blood of her abuse, as evidence of this larger case, and eventually sent those to us. And I remember receiving those in the mail in this package and holding them up, and it just the reality of child sex trafficking just all coming into focus, and just the surreal, heart-shattering experience of holding the pajamas of a little girl that were still stained with the blood of her abuse. I fell onto my knees and I just began to weep. We put those in that awareness center, and for the years that we ran that awareness center, people would come through, and we had this whole scene that we had developed, this brothel room, very similar to the way that they were built in Cambodia. The pajamas were laid on this little wooden bed there, and people would just read the description, observe what was going on, and so many people had the same experience of just falling to their knees and just breaking over the reality of what is going on there. And so you are every day living in a situation where you're face to face with these realities of the violent sexual abuse of these beautiful little children. How have you, I'm sure this is a question you've been asked before, how do you personally navigate that on a heart level?
Well, sometimes I didn't navigate it very well. Sometimes it would catch up with you, right? The urgency you feel, right? When you know what's happening, you know where it's happening, but you don't have the resources at that time to do anything about it. And I would, it was, I mean, just, and I think this is good for people who are going to join the fight. My bride, Bridget, and I, we love each other deeply. We are committed to this ministry together. And after about 6 years, we didn't like each other anymore. We never would have gotten divorced, but we would have just been hate each other till death we part. Mm-hmm. And there was a pastor that came, and people come all the time, right? And they ask you, how's it going? And we would always lie and say, well, it's great. Yeah, we're God is doing miracles. But one day we were asked a question, and we pretty much threw up on this poor pastor. We told him exactly all our struggles, everything we were doing. And he said, our church will send you on a retreat for couples that, are in the field and all that. And Bridget, being much wiser than me, said yes, while I continued to fight the idea. Like, we don't need that, But anyways, that was instrumental. But the bottom line for me is how much time I spend with Jesus every day. And I know that's cliche in a lot of ways, but I'm saying that if I don't spend 2 or 3 hours in the morning trying to connect with Jesus, I'm just I lose sight of what's happening. I lose sight of what God is doing, right? And I lose sight of the fact that He's our provider, right? And then all of a sudden, I'm trying to manipulate people to give to AIM, and my focus gets all out of whack, and I never celebrate everything He's doing. And so for me, without that time, I'm a totally different person. I like to say, without that, I run out of love about 9 a.m. But with that time, really focused on Him and celebration, right? Because there's always one more, right? And so you blow past the miracle. And what happens in these kids' lives, or some of the bad guys we help through the Lord's gym, they're miracles, right? And it's not an overuse or hyperbole. They're miracles, and we just go right by them. We don't take time to celebrate what God is doing and recognizing. And I think this is one of the harder lessons that we learned, one life at a time, right? It's going to take a long time. There's no 5-year plan to ending sex trafficking, right? If you feel like that, you're going to be really disappointed. You're going to burn out, right?
Yeah.
But if you can just focus on that one heart and see what God will do through that person, in that person, then it becomes doable.
That's profound insight. It's very clear that you are living in a very present to the life source of Christ that fuels your work and sustains you in this. And I just think it's really profound to hear you describe that. Because this field this issue is so dark, and I can absolutely relate to that, living in that place of dependency on a life source outside of yourself, and a heart posture of how do we honor the small victories to keep our spirit going in this. So I felt like a microcosm experience of what it must be like to live there, because I had gone out, and the day we arrived there was a man who was outside of a brothel bartering to have sex with a child, which, is so out in the open there. And we know it happens here, but it's all very clandestine. And it was so out in the open. And so to see that was just, it was just so surreal. And I remember chasing this man down the street, and we had this encounter with this man. And then, we eventually went and talked to you. Eventually we got these pajamas. We got, I think, a microcosm experience of what it's like to be in Cambodia, a place where men fly from around the world to come buy children for sex, where parents are complicit in the selling of their children, where there are 15-year-old pimps that are facilitating the whole thing. It's all just so mind-blowing. And, for me, when I step back from it, I just think this is a condition of humanity that happens when we lose our inherent value of human life. And but for you, since we have you with us, I think there's a lot of people who have maybe never ever heard your story, B, maybe have no idea what's going on in Cambodia, or C, are just, completely out of touch with the reality of child trafficking. Of course, we care about adult trafficking too, but it's, when you insert a 7, it's just like unthinkable. Can you help give some insight into what's actually going on in Cambodia? What is the situation that you stepped into there?
Yeah, I can. Before that, I want to go back to the last question a little bit. And, I really need to ask for your forgiveness. You and Exodus Cry are part of those victories. We needed to let you know when you can celebrate, because you're so many steps past what you've done, right? Like when we're on our knees praying for enough money for the next week, and somebody calls and says, we just saw Nefarious and we want to donate this much money. We need to tell you those things because it happens so often. And the transformation, I need to be a better friend. And let you know that, because you guys are remarkable and you've changed Bridget's in my life, and you've changed the lives of hundreds, even thousands in Cambodia.
Well, thank you. Believe me, there's no apology necessary from our part, but I received those words, and our team, whether those stories are shared in real time, we're tracking with the work and the successes of AIM, and constantly celebrating what's happening through your lives and your work in Cambodia. And I really appreciate you sharing that. That means a lot. Thank you.
Well, what's it like in Cambodia? I think for most of us it's unimaginable, because most of the girls that we rescue, like 90%, have been sold by their family. And so you have these little girls, and in the most recent raid was 5 girls ranging from 8 to 12 years old, right? I mean, just babies. And so the parents get about 10% of the sales price, but they don't know, but they'll do it for 10%. 90% goes to the trafficker, the middleman. And what is the number of men, you mentioned it, that travel to Cambodia to purchase little girls? Like you talked about the pajamas and how they made you feel. When these girls are rescued and come into our aftercare, they are so desperate to be loved, right? That I mean, we all are, right? But if imagine this is their situation, right? The mom that's supposed to love them sells them. The dad that's supposed to love them most of the time isn't around at all. Then some foreign man, many times an American, and Americans are considered the best in Cambodia. They come into his house, and he lets them go to school half day, but then he abuses them the other half. And the confusion that they have. So many think there's something wrong with them. Right? Like, well, my mom sent me here, so it must be okay, right? My mommy sent me here. And then here's this American, and Americans are good, and he's letting me go to school. What's wrong with me that I hate what he's doing to me? And just for them to realize, the first victory is to realize there's nothing wrong with you, right? You should, there's wrong with everybody else in your life, sadly, but there's nothing wrong with you. And like, who would think you would have to tell that to someone? Who would think that you would have to tell a child who's been raped multiple times, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, honey, right? And think how hard it is for them to accept love then, right? After all that's been to them and been done to them. And the staff that we have, the Cambodian staff we have is incredible, because these kids are not well behaved when they're rescued. And why would they trust us? Right? Why would they trust us? Everyone that's been in their life has misused them or abused them. And so their behavior is very bad. In the Cambodian culture, if you have a kid that's very bad, you just give them a whack in the head and send them on their way, right? And it's not child abuse in the sense that we think of here. It's just part of but to those kids it would be, right? To those girls who are so highly traumatized, anything like that. And to see a staff put up with such behavior that they would never accept from their own kids, day after day, and still be able to pour out love on them, that eventually it gets through. That's what every day is like, right? Every day there's a kid like that that's going to be coming to you. And every day you have, I think it's more than imagine their pain and suffering, because after this many years, you've seen it so many times. And that's true for our staff, right? Most of our staff has had over 10 years of service with us. And for them to continue to be able to do that in the face of what seems a never-ending battle is really incredible.
Wow. Yeah, it's really difficult to take an inventory for the kind of damage that's done on just a human soul, spirit, biological, spiritual level, going through something as violent as trafficking and from such a young age. And it's powerful to hear you talk about that work of restoration with them.
In just a few decades, porn has invaded the screens of nearly every household with an internet connection. But few people know the truth about the multi-billion-dollar industry behind this content.
Action!
Our documentary miniseries Beyond Fantasy rips the mask off of the porn industry. It takes viewers straight into the belly of the beast and brings them face to face with some of the biggest porn producers and performers, as they describe, in their own words, an industry that profits from ethical violation, coercion, and abuse.
The chances, the risks that they take are the deal that they make with the devil when they come into this business.
It's a hard-hitting series that exposes the porn industry like no other film, but keep in mind that it does include the use of blurred porn video clips, so we encourage viewer discretion. You can watch the Beyond Fantasy series for free on YouTube or at beyondfantasy.com.
You talked about this SWAT team that you guys have developed. So knowing your personal story, you wind up in Cambodia on the back end of a missions trip for a couple of weeks and inadvertently kind of discover this issue of trafficking. You come back, you see this special on. It's about all these kids being trafficked in Cambodia that you were just there. You'd seen these kids. Now you're putting two and two together. Long story short, you end up there after doing a lot of due diligence work. You end up there to intervene, to step in the middle of this trafficking situation and to make a difference. What would lead you to the point of starting a SWAT team? And also, how does something like that get approved in a country like Cambodia, who makes such a large part of their GDP from tourism? That's in their best interest just to cover up the situation. I'm very curious about how all that happened. And you identify as a Christian, as do I. You were formerly a pastor. I think it would raise a lot of eyebrows that, a Christian pastor has the audacity to, arm himself with guns and bullets and a SWAT team to address trafficking. Like, why not just pray it away? Or, there's a lot of those sentiments. And so I think it also brings into question kind of your view of God, and what do you think is permissible in the will of God as a way to go after this? There's so many questions that all that brings up. I'm curious how all that got started and kind of your perspective on having a SWAT team.
Okay. Well, first, I've never shot anyone. I just want to make that clear. But how it came about is...
You probably wanted to.
Oh, yeah. That's why I don't own a gun. But anyways, when we moved to SWAT, it was a really bad place, right? And there's lots of bad things going on. As we see God transform the community, the locals start giving us intel about trafficking going on. And we would pass this on to different organizations and the police. And we actually did that 16 times in a row, and they were tipped off 16 times in a row. And so I thought, well, what, we got to get over this. We've got the intel. And I also had a relationship with the general over anti-trafficking. It started in not a good way. I was being interviewed on CNN, and for some reason I thought people in Cambodia don't watch CNN, so I talked about police corruption. And the next day, the general sent a car to pick me up the next morning, went into his office, and I was pretty nervous at the time, but I had files of like all these cases being tipped off. And he was actually a good man, and he saw that, and he said, well, I'll try to keep watch over it and all that. But then the same thing happened. So I thought, why not have a SWAT team, right? And so I wrote a proposal that was about, like 40 pages. And I talked to different people who had experience, because I had no experience. And there was actually a detective from the UK that I talked to who was helping out in Cambodia. And so I put together this proposal. We went in to see the general with it. And I know he's going to say no, right? He's not going to say yes to this. So I have all the arguments ready to show him why he should say yes. He takes forever going through the proposal. It seemed like he was taking 10 minutes a page. And he gets to the end and he goes, let's do it. I was like a little pissed off. I said, I have all these great arguments that I didn't even get a chance to use. And, but anyways, he goes, well, let's get this started right away. Right. And which was great, but we needed $250,000 to start the SWAT team, right? To get bullets and weapons and SWAT, the vests and everything. And it was really how God has worked so often for us, right? We get a call from our home church pastor, and he goes, hey, for Christmas, we want to do a special offering. What project do you have? And I said, I got the perfect one. We're going to start a SWAT team. And he says, that's not something we can get behind. I'm sorry. And I said, okay, I understand that. And so then he has a meeting with his staff, And he says, like this crazy guy, I talked to him in Cambodia, he wants money for his SWAT team. And I told him, no way. And the staff says, well, wait, didn't you just write a book about thinking outside the box, not being the same? And so they convicted him, and he calls me back. And so their campaign for Christmas, Bullets for Jesus. And they raised enough money for the SWAT team, and it was just a few months later, the great guy from the UK detective came on to lead it, and we were off and running.
So, we kid about some of these things because it's just such an unusual expression. We don't, in the Church of America, we don't see churches starting SWAT teams. It's not something that we see happening. So there's a kind of a humorous element to this. But the reality is that, as you described, there were 16 situations in a row where the intel came back to you, you organized the raid, and then the authorities that were responsible for following through with that came into a situation where the brothel was empty or whatever happened because there was some corruption in the mix that was tipping off these brothels. And so there was an urgency to this situation in order to be able to actually conduct an effective raid to rescue these children.
Right.
And then since that time, you have had how many successful raids?
I don't know the number of raids. I know that we've rescued over 1,800 girls and arrested over 500 perps.
Wow.
And it's just been crazy. And I do want to mention that corruption was not in the Cambodian police. It was in an organization that was assisting the police, and so it was kind of a shock. Not that, there's corruption everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But it was surprising to us that in these cases it was not the police that tipped them off, but another organization.
So 17 years has it been?
17, yeah.
Yeah, so 17 years you've been invested in this work now on all sides. Just real quick, rattle off the 5 areas that you guys focus on. There's prevention.
Rescue. Restoration or empowerment. I got to use the marketing terms. Go ahead.
Yeah. Number 4.
Reintegration.
Okay. So you're really invested in doing this work from all sides. You guys have the most effective intervention team in the world, in my experience of observing this, in terms of a SWAT team where it blocks out any outside corruption. You have total autonomy to conduct your own investigations, conduct the raid, and it's been immensely successful. 1,800 girls rescued. And then you have the most successful restoration program that I have observed in the world, bringing these girls through a process of restoration, and then an extremely effective reintegration program that gets them job training, placement, and you walk alongside of them for years after they get through the restoration program. On one hand, it's just incredible, that work, and I just think it's so important for us to celebrate this work that's happening. It is literally transforming a nation. And but you and I both have a common concern for this issue of pornography. And for us at Exodus Cry, this has become a huge focus for us over the past number of years. And we have started to campaign along some very specific issues pertaining to pornography. But for me, that emphasis started back when we were filming Nefarious, and I began to observe these ways that pornography was overlapping with sex trafficking. Could you talk about, in your experience, how pornography overlaps and intersects with this aspect of child trafficking that's going on in Cambodia?
What was amazing to us is we found out that in Cambodia, this is just in Cambodia, there's over 200 producers and distributors of child pornography in this tiny little country that's being shipped all over the world. And so what ends up happening with that is in Cambodia, that's the entry for these kids to go into, to be trafficked, right? Because their value is gone because they're no longer virgins as far as the culture is concerned, as far as their parents are concerned. And that ends up with kids being trafficked at a higher rate. It also fuels the demand, right? As you know better than I, but the research that's been done in Cambodia, the number of men who have talked about watching porn and then going to a brothel and doing what they saw in porn, the connection of gang rapes to watching porn in Cambodia. Again, it's not my research, but the research that's been done, it's overwhelming, the impact of porn. I mean, when we speak about it, we talk about porn fuels sex trafficking. It's an accelerator that's beyond our efforts, right? I mean, what we do, we try to impact that, but it's honestly, we have not had really great success in that. It's the Cambodian law is very weak. Even when we tried to turn the SWAT team over to investigating it, Cambodian law is weak when it comes to pornography. And so, and it's not just the pornography that's created there. I mean, these men in Cambodia who are living out what they saw in porn, the porn comes from all over the world. It comes from the United States. We were able to do one thing. There was it looked like a little storefront that was offered online access to the people in SWAT. But when we went in one day, every screen had pornography on it. And there was a 6-year-old boy sitting on his grandfather's lap watching porn. And, like I said, better than I do all of the different impacts of porn, but we see it destroying kids' lives in Cambodia every single day.
One of the areas that I began to see that pornography overlaps with sex trafficking was when we were out on our trip to Cambodia. And I remember you telling the story of one girl who was acquired by an American expat pedophile who was acquiring girls to work at his home as house girls or whatever, justification he was using. And how this girl in particular, I remember you telling me her story, how pornography was first used to show her, this is what you're going to have to do. This is what's going to be expected of you. So there was a grooming element to it where pornography was being used to groom the girls. And then when they were, in this particular case, tied down and drugged and raped, that pornography was made of their exploitation as well. So I don't know if there's any more that you would want to elaborate on how it's used to groom, because you guys have brought in so many girls to work through that process of restoration. And where does it fit in terms of the grooming and then also the side where then pornography actually gets made of them? And how does that contribute to the trauma that they experience as a result of trafficking?
Well, first of all, the grooming is more than this is what you should do, right? This is what we want you to do. It's showing that it's okay. See, it's in the movie, and see, there's Americans that are doing it. So this is okay. When this happens to you, this is okay. It's not wrong. So, they get that, again, back to that confusion. What's wrong with me? Because this isn't wrong. This is okay. This is what men and women do. But I couldn't give an accurate percentage, but most of the girls that we rescue have been forced to view porn and used as a means of grooming. And that second part, to really say, like, it's okay. See, this is okay. You can watch it on your computer. That's one of the sad parts of technology, right? And, that in Cambodia, you used to have to go to DVD store and buy porn, and now you just have it on your smartphone. And so 90% of the men in Cambodia have a smartphone, and they use it for that purpose. But I think, sometimes we can lose sight of the damage to the boys, right? Because as you know, it's a very young age. The boys are watching porn. It's developing how they think they should treat women. And if you're in a culture like Cambodia, where women are second-class citizens, and you're a young man and you watch this and you think that's how it's supposed to be done, you have no remorse over what you've done to a girl that you bought or raped on the street. And that's a whole other level of taking away your conscience for, like, the men not thinking they're doing anything wrong.
One of the dangers of pornography is that there are no protections for children that are exposed to this. And they're internalizing these stories and these messages in pornography. If you're a young boy as a perpetrator mindset, or a young girl into becoming, acquiescing to to being this sexual object that, exists to be penetrated by men. And for me, that's a really disturbing aspect to the introduction of pornography into our world in this modern context. We're not talking about a hieroglyphic carving on a wall. We're talking about highly potent, graphic, often violent sexual imagery that is being put into the world and exposed to children. And so that was one of the things that I was wrestling with when I did an investigation of the porn industry, is being in Cambodia, hearing these stories in depth from you about situations where they were being groomed through pornography, as well as pornography being made of them. But just the part of, like, bringing that to some of these pornographers and giving them an opportunity to answer for themselves. Like, maybe you didn't intend this, but what responsibility do you bear for the content that is being used to groom young children into sex trafficking? And it was really interesting to dialogue with pornographers about that, because by and large, they just had no regard at all, no consideration, no concern at all whatsoever for whatever happened with that content once it was released out there. But part of my message to even the pornographers who would identify themselves as, attempting to be more ethical was like, well, even in a, best case scenario, where you're trying to make above board content or whatever, it's still outside of your control where this content goes. You yourself refer to it as adult content, but there's no protections for children online. And their whole thing was, well, or protections when it ends up in the hands of a trafficker who wants to use it for nefarious purposes. But their argument was, well, parents need to do a better job. And I just, the thought of like a pornographer lecturing a parent is already so ironic in the first place. But just the naivety, I guess in a best case scenario, the naivety, or just even just the conscience kind of cognitive dissonance when it comes to this issue is just so alarming. And but I appreciated the stories that you shared with me because they provided that bigger perspective. And so for me, it's not always just an issue of personal individual rights. It's also weighing those against what's happening in our world, what's happening in our society, what's happening among children. Try to take all those things in consideration when we decide on what kind of world we want to create, what kind of society we want to create. And I remember leaving with just being so impacted with this bigger perspective of, even if somebody has, no moral misgivings about pornography, just in general, there are still areas where it's being used in nefarious ways that currently we just don't have a way to protect against. And that's alarming.
Well, and I think, for, as we're a Christian ministry, right? And I think that the church needs to jump on this. And the church, I think this is Satan's perfect tool because the church doesn't address it. Pastors watch porn at the same rate as everyone else does. Barna did a great research on that. I'm sure you're aware of it. But that should be a low-hanging fruit in this fight, shouldn't it? Shouldn't we be able to address this in the church and not in the men's group? Because about 1% of the church goes to the men's group, number one, and women use porn as well. But, one of our goals is to get the lead pastors on Sunday morning to be tough and address this issue of porn, because the church is no different than the world when it comes to this. And this should be at least one of the differences that make Christian men different, that they should be at a point where they would say, I'm not going to do anything to hurt kids. And I think part of it is ignorance. I think because it's not being addressed within the church. And of course, as you know, there's those who are addicted. But the church has an awesome opportunity to, what I try to preach to the pastors is you can make a global impact without leaving your home by just addressing this porn issue. And that's one of my prayers that I would hope, let's get the church on this, for goodness sakes. The men in the church and women in the church watch porn just like the rest of the world does. And let's address it in what should be low-hanging fruit.
I agree. And, part of our work, because we're addressing issues that affect the entire world, has been trying to frame these issues in ways that apply to anyone. There are certain aspects of this work that we do where I find a lot of strength in my faith and also feel compelled and fueled by my faith. But, just observing the world at large, there are issues that are affecting our world that are just simply ethical issues that, regardless of a person's faith background, we should be discussing these issues just from even just an ethical premise of looking at what is the harm that is being done to children in this. And so I think for me, part of the concern is that, our society seems to be losing its conscience when it comes to children and protections for children. Even the issue of pedophilia is now attempting to be redefined and renamed and termed as, well, these aren't pedophiles, they're minor attracted individuals. And there's this attempt to even normalize pedophilia. So for me, I feel it's important to sound the alarm in faith communities, but even in non-faith communities, just as a culture at large. If you're regardless of faith background. I mean, I'm looking at, school institutions. I'm looking at just across our society in general. I think that we should be sounding the alarm of, what is happening to children in our way, how pornography is involved in that. And I think it's just interesting having this conversation with you because you're at ground zero of child exploitation. And I think you just have a unique perspective of seeing the way that a society is fractured if you don't protect kids.
Oh yeah, and I do think it's an issue for the total culture, right? I don't. What I hope. Most of our donor base are Christians, right? And we accept donations from anyone, and we share our stories with anyone. But that might be where I personally have the greater influence, right? And you can address a far greater audience than I'll ever address. But if I'm in a church, right, and they're giving me the pulpit, I probably shouldn't say this because somebody won't let me at the pulpit again. But what I say is that my deal is to talk about preventing sex trafficking, but I close out with porn, and I can be really straightforward. I can say things. It's easier for me than it is the pastor who lives there, but that's. For me, trying to use my voice where I have the greatest influence. But you're right. There shouldn't be anybody that sees porn and thinks like, oh, that's okay. No. And what's happening to our society? I mean, I don't know if you watch Bill Maher. I probably shouldn't admit I do that either. But, he has no friends now. Because he's going after the woke.
He's outspoken.
He's outspoken in what I believe is common sense that we need as a country instead of these two extremes that don't let that really drowned out other voices. And I feel what you're producing just needs to get in front of more people. Like you're beyond fantasy, right? I can't imagine there's anybody who watches it that isn't like, holy crap, this is what's happening. This is what happens to kids and women. And I want to do whatever I can with what, again, small audience that I have to say, watch those films because those that brings it home. And I had our entire staff watch it, right? And I say like, hey, this is how ugly this is. And the truth is there's probably men on our staff. We have over 500 on staff. There's definitely men using porn on our staff, right? And just in waking them up, right? So I'm rambling here, but I want your film to be seen by everybody in the world. Anyone who speaks English should see that film because you get a reality that you don't get in spoken word. Right? Like I can speak about it and I can talk about it. And I like to talk. It's pretty obvious. But when you get that visual, when you see it, it penetrates you in a whole different way than what someone telling the story can. When you tell the story the way you can in film, that has tremendous impact. And we just need to be all of your cheerleaders like me have to be doing everything we can to get people to watch.
Thank you. Yeah, we feel the same. We feel that, this is a really important film for the world to see. In my experience of investigating the porn industry, I had such a stomach-turning experience that I felt like I want to help create that for other people who don't have this opportunity so they can discover the reality of what this is, how it's being created, the injustice of it, and make more informed decisions, for their own lives, hopefully to stop viewing, consuming it, and fueling all that it fuels. And obviously we talked about the sex trafficking component of that. I feel like there's been kind of this thread through our conversation today where you really are a man who is driven, fueled, and sustained by your faith in the work that you do in this anti-trafficking space. And that's so commendable, and I very much relate to you in that sense. I know that for me, when I began to embark on this journey, that I quickly realized that I was stepping out of the box of what was considered to be like a normal expression of faith in our world. And I'm just curious from your perspective, how redirecting your life, at one time you were a pastor, you were very much in the mold of what we would understand as the modern day church, organized religion, and then you pivoted to focusing on this issue of sex trafficking. I remember one interview that you did, I think it was for CNN, where somebody was challenging you on this notion of starting a SWAT team. And you said, and your answer to them was, well, I think Jesus would want us to kick ass. And I just know how many feathers a statement like that ruffles in the faith community. But you seem to be operating from a paradigm of God, your image of God. So a lot of people struggle with the idea of faith, religion, etc., because there's a lot of baggage of ways that it's either been used to control or manipulate people, or ways that it's been used to cover up, situations of abuse. There's a lot of baggage in that. We see, different things in the different parts of the church, the Catholic Church, and the sex scandals, and all of these things, and that's really affected people, but people's perception of faith and religion. I am very refreshed by your expression of faith that is devoted to helping to protect children, rescue them from systematic exploitation, and restore them through the offer of love. That to me is a whole different perspective and image of faith and religion that I think is a lot of people have, or that has been expressed in different ways. I would just be curious to know from your perspective, when you made this pivot, how did your image of God change? And how, in more of a practical way, can you describe, because I feel like this conversation has gone back there a few times, can you describe in a practical way how your faith has helped fuel and sustain what you're doing?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. Thanks to Nefarious, I was asked to go to Spain and speak about fighting sex trafficking at universities, all very secular. And the guy who was taking us around was a Christian, but he said to me, whatever you do, don't let people know you're a Christian, because that's no good here. They won't listen to you. And at this first university, it was a pretty packed house. It was he's in the back. And so I started with, you should know I'm a Christian. and he's like in the back, waving, no, God. But then I said, and I know some of you have been hurt by Christians, and sadly it's damaged your view of Jesus. And I'm a pretty simple guy, so let me tell you what my view is. God has given us one job, just one. We don't have any other job but one. It's not to judge anyone. We're not supposed to judge. That's God's job. Judging is fun. You have to admit, judging is fun, but it's God's job, not mine. The second is having people become Christians. It's not my job. That's God's job. I don't care about that. What I care about is my number one job, and that's to love you and to love everybody else that God brings into my life. And if I worry about job one, people will have a different opinion of Jesus. And that's my simple explanation of what Christianity means to me.
On that note, you told a story in Nefarious about how that message has really affected the identity of girls coming out of these situations where they felt so worthless. And I think this is a good place to end. You started our conversation by talking about how the girls are now working as investigators to help the efforts of the SWAT team. And so this going from being rescued to now coming full circle and participating in the rescue of others is very, very powerful. And it's unprecedented and just incredible and historic. And so in Nefarious, you talk, though, about what you just shared, this presentation, this idea of God as a God of love, and how deeply that has affected the identity of the girls that you work with in the process of their own restoration. Is there anything that you can say on that note to end our conversation today?
Yeah, and this probably isn't politically correct, but I think that the amount of love these girls need, right? Like that to healing for us, right? As far as we would describe healing is, the girls know they have a family. No matter what they do, there's someplace that they're wanted. They're unconditionally loved, and then they need to find a purpose beyond themselves, how they'll be a conduit of God's love. But I don't think there's a human being alive, certainly it's not me, that has the love that they need. And if I just try to do it on my own, not only do I fail, but I hurt people. But if I can be a conduit of God's love, right? That's true, how much he loves me, how good he has been to me. Just for the how do I have an opportunity to help kids? Right? How could I be used to change a kid's life who's been so abused? If I can stay connected to a God who loves me that much, then his love will be available when mine runs dry. And I think, and when these girls experience, and I'm talking about me, but it's through our staff, right? That they experience this kind of unconditional love. That's when transformation takes place. We use cutting edge therapy, right? We use the best and all that, all those things that are important, right? For me, when a girl finishes all that, she's surviving. She's no longer a victim. But we want these kids to thrive. And to thrive takes those three ingredients: a place you belong, a love unconditional, and a purpose beyond yourself. And when you have those three things, God can do miracles.
I think that's a great place to end. And just thank you again so much for laying your life down and all the work that you and your wife, Bridget, have labored for in Cambodia. It's made an enormous impact, and we're just so honored to be a part of helping to tell your story and to highlight the story of these girls. So thank you so much.
You can check out all our podcast episodes, articles, and films at exoduscry.com and join the daily conversation by following Exodus Cry on all major social platforms.